Okay, we are live, and we're going to be discussing the book Transforming Leaders into Progress Makers Leadership for the 21st Century. My name is Robert Apino, and I am speaking all the way from Vietnam. Ryan, you want to introduce yourself quick?
Yeah, Ryan Schubart from Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Todd Norton from Georgetown, Kentucky.
And Dana Watts from Nevitt, Maryland.
Awesome. So let's start off. Let's just kind of go through what we started making notes on and kind of organizing the handout. So maybe start off with some of the key ideas or just things that struck us while looking at the book.
Well, I think from my perspective, the things that stuck out to me, we were talking about the difference between exploration and refining, and talking about the balance that leaders have when choosing to do that, and the kind of the artistry of trying to figure out which way to go. You need a little bit of both. But exploration is very dangerous, and if you do nothing but exploration, you could get lucky, or you could find yourself digging a larger hole for yourself. And then refining, you're never really moving on to the next thing. You could find yourself at a dead end. So you have to have a balance of both. This is kind of one of the bigger points I had about making progress.
Yeah, and they bring that up multiple times. They mention progress makers throughout the whole book. After reading the whole thing, if you were to define what a progress maker, because I just did it to my wife earlier today, what would you say?
Well, I think someone that's a progress maker is probably somebody that's looking to always looking ahead at ways to move something forward. One step in front of the other is not necessarily always making progress, because if you're going down the wrong path, then that's not really progress. So you have to have that vision to look up a couple of steps ahead, but not forget where you are, and making sure that what you're doing right now is being efficiently done, so that you're ultimately flexible enough that you can adapt with the times. I think that word adapt is really key in being a progress maker, at least in my definition.
I felt like it was really somewhat difficult to read the book without wanting to change the names constantly to the progress, like look at it through the lens of education, and thinking about our principles in admin and leadership, and how much I wish they were reading the book, and how there's been so many changes in the field of education, and the schools that are really doing it well aren't afraid of that change, and they are really they're embracing the concepts of progress leadership in a really fundamental way that's making changes within the classroom, and making changes in the way they're recruiting people, and the way that they're starting new initiatives in their school in a really good way. And I can't, if I was in business, I'm wondering, do you always read a book on such a huge topic like this through your own lens? Because all I could see was my lens in some way.
Definitely. And, I use this kind of as a going away speech to my students at the end of the year. And I talk to them about, I think at the beginning it talks about sometimes it's about the leader, but sometimes it's more about the idea, and how progressive maybe the idea is, and how people gather around that idea. And so despite who the leader is, if the idea is part of that progress making, and those that are involved and grab a hold of that idea, progress goes on even after the leader leaves. And maybe that's not necessarily reflected in the rest of the book, because it talks more about the actual leader, but something I grabbed a hold of at the beginning. And my hope is that things don't fail because the leader leaves. And I think you're not much of a progress maker if everything is only happening because of you. So I think part of this progress makers is really that transforming the whole organization as you're in your leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would add, I mean, as I was reading this whole book, I kept thinking of you, Dana, and your dissertation topic with disruptive leadership. And I kept just going, oh man, this is totally going to be something Dana keeps citing back, because this whole idea of leaders emerging that aren't necessarily positional leaders, and the kind of like it's more about moving an organization forward than holding a formal a position. And they really kept kind of bringing that back multiple times. And they even said at one stage later in the book, one of the key things to do was as a leader to get, they called it opinion leaders, to make a difference in an organization, because by getting opinion leaders on board, they're the ones that go out and see more people directly, and I found that part really interesting. But as I kind of read through the whole book, I kept thinking of disruptive leadership, Dana, and how that would connect. And I don't know, did you find connections as well in it, or what were you
I've
thinking?
highlighted way too much of the book already, and like with notes, like dissertation, lit review, this goes in here, this goes in here, this goes in here. Like the book was super perfect for everything that I'm trying to, that I'm super passionate about right now. And one of the things that I really loved was that, like, that what motivates people to do this, right? And that it's not necessarily because of a job title, and it's not necessarily because they're going to get paid more, but like they have this like desire to make a bigger difference for the greater good. And I do think that that's where a lot of educators come from, is that we really want to change. We really believe in the learning process, and there's that interesting article. Well, okay, I don't think it's so interesting, that came out in the New York Post, I believe, yesterday, about the fact that like this professor's trying to ban all laptops from his classroom, right? Because he's like, learning's not happening and no one's listening to my lecture. Well, your lecture probably sucks. Like, your lecture is probably not good. Let's ban your antiquated, teaching methodology and start bringing some really good pedagogy into the classroom and start reaching students, no matter what age they are, and embracing the way that they learn, not the way that you teach. And I think that that's really at the heart of what so many change agents, progress leaders, disruptive leadership is doing, is they really want to see that massive change happen in education. We know it's going to happen, and if we don't do it ourselves, some big business is going to come in and try to take over, and it won't be for the betterment of kids and learning. It will be for the betterment of making money.
Yeah, Dana, and I think to add to that, with a point that was made earlier on in the book as well, some of the lessons that were learned about, when you're trying to make change, you can't be obsessing on the status that you have right now, and you can't be working diligently to try to make your idea better. A lot of times, people trying to make names for themselves or move up the ladder or whatever are trying to. They have a pet project or something that they feel very passionate about, and they get so motivated and so focused on making sure that idea is as best as good as it can be, that they never think about life after that idea. And that's one of those things that he pointed out was, trying to make sure that when it's time to jump platforms. Some of the examples were, you're talking about Stephen Jobs and the iPod and all the projects that Jobs passed up. And the iPod actually was almost one of them, because you're looking at the different types of products that he was focused on. If you don't have that vision, or you get rid of that tunnel vision, so that you can see when you need to move to the next level there. But some people, I think about here in Virginia, we just had the board of superintendent of the state of education just retired, and her big thing was standards of learning tests. And the whole other part of the nation is going to Common Core, and there's also a debate about that. But we're one of 4 states that's not gone that way. And why? Well, probably because the leader of our state is the one that invented the SOLs, and so she could not see past that. She wanted to make those better, and so her argument at the end was, these are just as good as the Common Core. Well, if they're just as good as the Common Core, then what's the problem? Well, I made the SOL, so I think that's that's something that leaders need to figure out as well, is how to become detached from that idea and be able to move forward.
Well, and that reminds me of one of the sections which was really about identifying errors. Right, so you can have the most airtight plan ever, but if you don't start going, what's going to go wrong with this, or what could be the potential errors, or what am I missing, especially if you're only looking at it through one lens. I really appreciated that. And there was this quote that I highlighted: "We see what we want to see. We don't see the errors of our ways, and are doomed to repeat them." And then it kind of talks about ego-protective foolhardiness at work, and that kind of reminded me of what you were just saying, because it sounds like to me in Maryland, the whole curricular structure, instead of going to Common Core, rests on one person's investment in what they put time and energy into, and they're not really open to looking at how perhaps Common Core could be better or better serve the kids. It sounds more linear than that, and less kind of broad.
Right, and on top of that, you have to be able to move forward with something before necessarily you have all of it figured out, and you have to have enough courage to say, okay, this could pay off really big for us, and it might fail, but we're not going to know unless we try it. If we wait and refine it until it's perfect to roll out, by the time we finish getting it all refined, it's not going to work because the times have changed, the settings have changed, and so he also points out that it's really really important to to go with those ideas and reinvent platforms if you have to, and you may not have all the details figured out, but go with it, and you can work those out on the fly.
Well, and that also brings me to the point. Oh, go ahead, Todd. I'll pick up after you. Go ahead.
I was going to say that kind of goes with, if you look at my notes for Chapter 9, Chapter 9 it says envisioning the future with a calculated boldness. So a lot of Chapter 9 says, hey, you got to go after it, but you can't be timid, but you also can't be so brash that no one will buy into the vision, and so you kind of shun both being so brash with being so timid, and kind of the leader has an awareness of what's going on and where they want to go, what tools they may need to get there, what tools are broken that they're currently using, but it's a really interesting idea of just calculated boldness. So when do you really make that stand? And working with a new teacher in my school, I've told her often, you have to pick your battles, and sometimes you're not gonna, the last day of school and the kid's not doing what you told him, you're not gonna probably win that battle sending an email to parents and arguing with this kid. So I'm like, sometimes you just have to go, it's okay, and I think that as a leader, picking that and really calculating. I like the term calculated boldness, knowing when to push ahead, we look at the Preakness last night, Belmont, I guess, and knowing when to make that final lurch ahead, when to stay in the pack, when to go ahead, when to know you're out of position. Use some horse racing experience.
Sure. Yeah, I was just going to add that I don't remember them writing this word in the book, but it does remind me of Google's big thing with being in beta, and it's okay to be in beta, to push something out, even if you don't know it. Although they do mention, I found it interesting because I didn't realize this with Amazon. The Jeff Bezos, I think it is the CEO or the founder, and perhaps actually both, I think. But when he pushed out Amazon before actually releasing it to the public, this comes back to my point with errors as well. He had people at Amazon that he had employed at the time and their families test it for 3 months and go, hey, does this thing work? And then release it to the general public to try to, again, anticipate those errors. And I think this kind of connects with both of what you're saying. And this really connects to me in Asia because they mention, again, going back to identifying errors, sometimes it comes back to saving face. And saving face is really huge in Asia, but you come back to the state, or when I come back to the States, it's just as big there. People just don't don't identify it the same kind of way. And I don't know if you're familiar with what saving face is. I'm guessing you are. In Asia, it's huge. Basically, you would spend thousands, if not millions, of dollars to save face and protect the big boss, because if the big boss loses face, everything could fail in the organization. So it's again quite fascinating.
Well, it's pretty reminiscent of what's happening even in America right now with all the GMC callbacks of all these different vehicles. And if they had just admitted they screwed up, what was it, 10 years ago, 9 years ago, how many lives would have been saved? How many millions of dollars would have been saved? But instead they put some faulty part in, they knew it was faulty, and now there's all these recalls. It really goes back to, in Chapter 13, it's titled Seek, Nurture, Evaluate Actionable Ideas. And to me, it's completely like a chapter out of design thinking about fail fast, prototype, reconceptualize, repeat it, don't be afraid to fail, then launch it, morph it, and then decide what's the best things about this, and then keep redoing it until you got it right, but don't be afraid to just get it out there and try. And I think that's a huge thing, whether you're talking about education or you're talking about business. That's a concept that people are afraid to say, okay, that didn't work.
Yeah, we have to encourage. Go ahead, Todd.
I said, anytime I speak to teachers about trying new things, I always, and I don't even know where I got it from, but I do this in my own class. I call everything an experiment. And I tell my principal, hey, I'm going to try this experiment. We'll see if it works. And then if it doesn't work, people are forgiving because it was just an experiment, and experiments fail all the time. And so I tell teachers, I'm like, call everything an experiment, because if you don't, then it seems like it's much more permanent. And if it fails, it's your fault that this didn't work. But if it's an experiment, people are very forgiving of a failed experiment, because they're like, it's just experimented. It might have worked, it might not have worked. So I call anything I do that's new, and even with my students, I'm like, we're going to try to experiment, and then they're very forgiving if it doesn't work. Because they're like, we'll just try
my experience with my kids is exactly the same. When I was a teacher, new things, they really get excited about the fact that they get to help you develop something for classes that may come after them. And so if you have that relationship with them, and so then it's about trying to translate that. I think about it now as an administrator. No offense to any teachers, but they are a little bit less forgiving sometimes. But if you got to find out a way to make sure that you have that open relationship with them, so that they feel as though you're not saying that you have all the answers and that you're exactly right. Hopefully they'll show a little bit more compassion when something goes wrong or something, because otherwise they're looking at you as, well, you're supposed to be making all these decisions, you're supposed to be right all the time, and you're not right. And so how about that? So it's really, I think about that relationship piece.
I have a teacher who calls it Courtney Almarino. She's a humanities teacher and in Delhi, and she always tells the students all the time, she'll say, listen, she's like, when you play a game, she's like, the first time you lose, you don't say, oh, I'm never touching that game again. She's like, you constantly try to beat the game. She's like, why do you do that with learning and you say, oh, I didn't get it right, so I'm just walking away, or this technology didn't work right, so I'm just going to walk away. She's like, think of everything as a game, and I'm going to beat it. And she's like, when you have that attitude, she's like, then you can blow things out of the water and do amazing stuff. And so I always try to say that whenever I'm talking with teachers. I'm like, okay, so this is a game, and we're gonna beat it. We're gonna keep going until we reach the high score or whatever.
And I just wanted to add as well. I really like the section that talked about communication, and kind of it was a nice reminder for me, and I imagine for you, especially Ryan, being an administrator. When we say something or we communicate a message to people, sometimes it's not. How do they call it? They said receiver-centric. Mm-hmm. So we need to be thinking about how are they receiving the message, and it gave some pretty wild statistics with what people actually perceive what you said versus what you actually meant what you said. And I know we think about this from time to time, but in a leadership position or as a progress maker, you really, that section really resonated with me, because you know, how are people perceiving what we're trying to say? And is this helping the problem, or is this creating it worse? And it made me think of all the leaders I've had, or I should say all the principals I've had in the last 12 years, and this and that, and just kind of the different ways they use communication, you know, electronic versus face-to-face. When do you drop these massively new news to everyone, and how do you make them feel comfortable, and what do you do? And I mean, it's complicated because everybody perceives things a little bit differently. But that section especially was quite refreshing, just looking at some of the strategies they had in place with that.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Robert. I mean, I think that the same can be said, you know, with a teacher-student relationship. Your students know when you're kind of mailing it in. They know when you're just trying to get to the next thing, and you're not grading something. You're just checking it to make sure they did it, or, you know, this assignment was not something that you did a whole lot of time, took a whole lot of time planning, and actually you may not even like this material. As an administrator, the two traps you really fall into are, one, being so busy that you assume that someone understands exactly where you're coming from, because how could they not? But you forget all the stuff that they're not privy to, or don't realize, or is not in their, you know, sphere of knowledge, as far as why would they even know that we're going to do this? I mean, they wouldn't know that. And then the other thing is making sure that you're genuine about what you're saying, because sometimes if you're just checking off that box, you know, at the end of the day, and you're tired, and you really just, you need to communicate this, it may come across as, look, can you just please do this? I just need you to do this, as opposed to, can we work together to, you know, what can I do to help you? What can you do to help me? How can we work together to get it done? So, and people can tell, students can tell, teachers can tell, and you know, everybody can tell when you're not being genuine about what you're trying to communicate.
For sure. Yeah, so I think, I mean, we've done a great job, I think, of discussing some of the major parts of the book. Do we need to, I think we're in a pretty good place. Well, how's everybody feeling?
Yeah, I feel like if we can just take these main points and kind of compress them so that we can communicate with the other groups in the jigsaw, I think we should be good.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
I think this is a good book, and there's a few parts that we've mentioned that really stand out, and I'm glad it chose this book. I don't know how all the other books are, but this one actually seemed really practical and something that I definitely feel I'll come back to.
I'll definitely
Scott.
come
And
back to
definitely,
it. Use it in the future, and then it actually goads me to almost, if you know, time wasn't an issue, read the other ones to see if they have, which is a good thing that we're doing the jigsaw, so we get to hear about the other books and decide, okay, so are those also just as worthy of my time?
Definitely.
Yeah, it's interesting, because as I was reading it, I was also marking down, like you were marking down things for your dissertation. I was looking at one of the leadership sessions I did earlier in the year at the Vietnam Tech Conference, which I'll be doing at another conference later this year. And I was actually grabbing some bits from it going, oh, that's a great way of looking at something. So yeah, I agree, Todd. It is definitely something I'll come back to. And yeah, Dana, I wish we had time to read all the other books, but it's cool that we got the jigsaw activity to help us with that. Okay, so I think we'll end our conversation now. It's been great discussing the book. And does anybody have any final thoughts or thumbs up?
Thumbs up.
All right.